Noah and the flood. One of the great stories of the Bible. It's complicated, it's weird, it's troubling. We've been talking about it for 3 weeks now. So here we are in chapter 9 of Genesis, which Nancy and Jeff just read for us. Noah and his family leave the ark. God says to them, "Be fruitful and multiply." And then God offers that beautiful promise. "As for me," God says, "as for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants and with every living creature, the birds and every animal of the earth. I establish my covenant with you that never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God goes on to say, "This is a sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature for all future generations. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth." The rainbow as a sign of God's covenant of care. Beautiful, beautiful. The Noah story would be great if it stopped there. But it goes on. It goes on, as you heard. Noah has 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and a grandson named Canaan. Again, as I've said so often about the Bible, but said a few weeks ago about this story in particular, the women are overlooked. They are left out of the story, which is a tragedy. So we're going to put them back in. I said a few weeks ago that Irene is Noah's wife. So we'll add daughters too. We'll give them names, Ashley, Jolene, and Renata, and twin granddaughters, so that there are more women than there are men. We'll call the granddaughters Opal and Delilah. So there they are. Irene, Noah, Ashley, Jolene, Renata, Opal, Delilah, Shem, Japheth, Ham, and Canaan, fresh off the boat. And Noah plants a vineyard. That's Genesis 9, verse 20. Noah plants a vineyard. He drinks some wine. He gets drunk, and he passes out naked in his tent. So let me say that Noah getting drunk is very understandable. He has experienced huge trauma. Ham, one of the sons, sees his father naked and tells the 2 brothers. The other brothers take a robe, they avert their eyes, and they drape the robe over their drunk father. Noah wakes up. He figures out that Ham has seen him naked, and he curses Ham's son. Noah curses his grandson, Canaan. That's verse 25. Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan, he shall be a lowly slave to his brothers. Ham, the son, and Canaan, the grandson, are cursed." It's a weird story. It's tragic. It's a reminder from ancient times right to the present that families are complicated. We could talk about alcoholism through generations when we hear this story. We could talk about generational trauma. We could talk about toxic masculinity. We could talk about birth order. There's lots to unpack in the Noah story. But what I want to focus on this morning is what happens with the story years later. So the story is set way back when, 5,000, 6,000 years before Jesus. It's a myth, but it's set 5,000 years before Jesus. Let's say it was written down maybe 500 years before Jesus. And then in the 1400s, on our side of Jesus, in the 1400s, a priest in Italy, someone we know as Ananias of Viterbo, in the 1400s, Ananias of Viterbo said that this curse of Ham in Genesis, this little story, this curse of Ham in Genesis, explains the difference between Europeans and Africans. Europeans are the descendants of Shem and Japheth, he said, And Africans are the descendants of Ham, who was cursed and became a slave. These are the words of Ananias of Viterbo. Therefore, Europeans, i.e. white people, are superior to Africans. That is what Ananias of Viterbo said in the 1400s. And it is absolute garbage. It's just made up junk. It's not in the text. He actually just created that out of his racist mind and gave the world a big old pile of theological horse poop. But people like weird things sometimes. They like mean things, right? And so people picked up on Ananias of Viterbo's nonsense. And in this country, in the 1830s in particular, there are many examples of slave owners in this country saying that it was fine, acceptable, even ordained by God for white Americans to enslave people who are Black, because the enslaved Black persons are descendants of Canaan and Ham, and therefore they live under this curse of Ham. That is balderdash. That is claptrap. That is drivel. That is hate-filled ignorance. So one of the things that I have consistently tried to talk about during the almost 10 years that I have been at Westmoreland is why we read the Bible. Because quite frankly, there are a bunch of us in our congregation who've kind of given up on the Bible. That's one of the things I've picked up on. So why do we read the Bible? Why do we read these stories like Noah and the flood and Genesis? In part, we read the Bible so that when people use it wrongly, we can call out their bull manure. When women are left out of the story, some people say, oh, women just aren't important. We can read the Bible and say, that's nonsense. Women are integral to the faith. When other people use things like this story to justify slavery and to justify racialized white supremacy, if we have a knowledge of the Bible, we can say that is garbage. So that's one of the reasons we read the Bible. We read the Bible to call out those who use the Bible wrongly. There are other reasons to read the Bible as well. There are the positive, proactive reasons to read our sacred scriptures. We read it to hear those words from God. As for me, I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants and with every living creature, that never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. I've set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Those are words in our scriptures as well. We never do well if we read the Bible only to refute and correct and harangue. We also need to read the Bible to understand God's hope, God's promise of life across the ages, God's covenant of care. We read the Bible to remember the rainbow with its colors of beauty and inclusivity. That is part of our story as well. The curse of Ham, that's nonsense. The disregard for women, that's ignorance. God's covenant of care for all people and all the earth, and for you, my friends, God's personal covenant of care for you, is deeply loving and hopeful. We read the Bible so that we can live with that kind of faith as well. And so today, as we think about this little corner of the Genesis story, I want to tell you a way that you can live out that kind of covenantal faith that cares for all, that kind of corrective and hopeful faith. I want to offer a very practical how-to as a part of this sermon this morning. The Cornerstone Fund of the United Church of Christ. Some of you know that organization, the Cornerstone Fund of the UCC. That is our denominational lending agency. It's our denominational bank, if you will. That's where we got the loan for the construction of our new elevators and gender inclusive restrooms and things like that. The Cornerstone Fund is also an investment agency. You can invest money in the Cornerstone Fund and earn interest. It's just like the stock market, you earn interest, but the money that we invest there then helps fund other church-related projects like our elevators and more accessible building. The Cornerstone Fund is rolling out a new investment program. They're calling it the Racial Equity Giving Bonus. And here's more or less how it works. If you invest a minimum of $2,500, it can be more than that, but if you invest a minimum of $2,500 in the Cornerstone Fund for 5 years and designate a give back gift of at least 10% to a nonprofit group that is working to address racial inequity, Cornerstone will pay you a rate bonus for 5 years. Now, not to get too technical because I'm a preacher and not an investment banker, but if you invest your money with Cornerstone Fund and designate a part of your investment to go to a racial justice group, they will pay you more on your investment for 5 years than you would normally earn. So you make more money by doing good, by working for racial justice. And they've come up with a list of approved racial justice groups. There are 40 or something groups on their list. The Black Youth Project, the Equal Justice Initiative down in Alabama, that's Brian Stevenson's group, the Thurgood Marshall College Fund, our own UCC, historically Black colleges and universities like Fisk and Dillard and Houston Tillotson. If you invest in the Cornerstone Fund and give a gift to one of these groups, the Cornerstone Fund will pay you a rate bonus. Now, as I said, I'm a preacher. I'm not an investment banker. I know that many of you are far more savvy than I am and more curious about these kinds of things. I know that you have questions. I know that you want details. And I know that the Cornerstone Fund would love to talk to you about this. All you have to do is Google Cornerstone Fund of the United Church of Christ. Follow their contact information, be in touch with them and say, I am interested in this racial equity investment program, and they will set you up, I promise. So thinking about that as a very practical way to live out racial justice, let's go back to the Noah story. Noah gets off the boat after the flood. He gets drunk. That's understandable. His son Ham sees him and is embarrassed. Okay. Then Noah curses Ham, which is weird. But even weirder, from that curse, some theologians and historians have said that slavery and racism are justified because Ham is the father of Africans. That is made up. That is such garbage. At the same time, there's a word in this story from God. As for me, I'm establishing my covenant with you and your descendants, and with every living creature, that never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. I've set my bow in the clouds as a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Care for the earth, care for all creation, love for one another, hope, promise. We are invited to live into that. One way we do that is through this Cornerstone Fund racial equity bonus. We invest money, we give money to racial justice work, and we make money thanks to this rate bonus. But we are invited to live as rainbow people, as the hymn said, following God's fiery pillar, letting God lead us where eagles soar. We are invited to live as people of hope, people of covenant, people of inclusivity and diversity. so that God's rainbow is ever in the clouds before us. May it be so with us on this day and forevermore. Amen.